Hello everyone, today we will use GraphQL with clean architecture in Jetpack Compose. So what is GraphQL, you may be asking, and GraphQL, it is used to run queries on APIs, and as you know, APIs are giving too much data, and this is helpful because we can select whatever we want from that API. So let's jump to coding. In order to use GraphQL in our app, we have to go to build.grader from the project and add the Apollo plugin, and let's also go to build.grader from the app module and add the Apollo GraphQL plugin. We also need the dependency for that, and we have to define the package name. And now let's also go to the manifest and add the permission for the internet. So use this permission internet and close this. Now let's go to plugins and search for GraphQL and install this, and after that you can restart your IDE, and this plugin will provide you the syntax highlighting feature, and this will help us to write the GraphQL files. Now we have to download the schema of the API, so this will help us to run queries on it. And let's open the terminal and paste this command. You will have it in the description, and also you will have the repository in the description too. And let's wait until it's finished. The build has finished, and let's collapse this and switch to the project view. And in the app module, in source package main, and in the GraphQL, we have the schema.graphqls. And now we have to create a new file called characters.graphql. Remember GraphQL, not GraphQLs, because GraphQLs files are the backend files and the GraphQL files are queries. Now let's open the Explorer and select characters. Let's select results. Let's get the ID, the name, the image, and the species, and let's copy this query and paste it here. Then let's modify the name into characters. Now let's create another file called character GraphQL. Now let's open the Explorer and select the characters, click on character, and now let's get the ID, the image, the name, species, and the gender, and copy this and paste it here and rename the query to character. Now let's switch to the Android view and set up the packages. So we have to create 2 more packages. Click on new package, create the domain and the data, and let's take them one by one. The UI will contain the UI logic and the components, and the domain layer will contain the business logic, and these are a set of rules that must be implemented in the data layer, and this is like a middleman between the data and the UI. And the data layer works with data, as the name says. And let's start with the domain layer, in which we have to create a new package called model, and this will have a character data class. By doing this, the app will not depend on the character query class that we have created here. And let's get the variables from here and paste them here, and let's add val, and I think all of them are strings, and pass a default value. Let me check if they are all strings. Yes, they are. So let's add the comma and we are good. Now let's create another model class. So this will be simple character, and this will be used in the character list So this is a data class too, and go to characters, get the names and paste them here. And let's make the same thing, val and string with an empty value. Now let's create another package in domain called network, and this will contain an interface called Rick and Morty client, and this will have two suspending functions, suspend fun, get character list, and this will return a list of simple character, and the second function is get character by ID, and the ID is a string and it will return a character. And by doing this, we separate the UI from the data, because the UI will use the Rick and Morty client, and the data package, the data layer, will implement this Rick and Morty client into a separate function, and it will run queries to the API. So let's implement it now by creating a network package in the data layer and create a new file called Rick and Morty client, and let's also append Apollo in the beginning, Apollo, and let's inherit from the Rick and Morty client, and let's implement the members. I remember that I forgot to make this nullable because it can return annual characters, so let's go back to the Rick and Morty client and add this question mark at the end of the character. And now let's create another package in the data layer called mapper, and this mapper will contain the character mapper file, and the character mapper file will have the mappers of the GraphQL classes, and it will map them to, for example, we have the character list, and this will map the results into simple characters that we will use in our UI, and also the get character, it will convert the result into a character class. Now let's go back to the character mapper and create a new function, characters query dot characters, and let's say to character list, and this will return a list of simple character, and equals this dot results map not null, get the result and create the simple character. I forgot to add the question mark here, and the simple character, it has the ID that we get from the result, or empty, the name, name or empty, image, and I think it's one more field, the species, result, species or empty. Now let's also add or empty here. Now let's create the character mapper, so character query dot character dot to character, and this will return a character from the domain, and this is equal to character from the domain, and we have the ID, this dot ID, or empty, oh, it's not nullable, I forgot, the name, this dot name or empty, the gender, gender or empty, this image or empty, and this dot species or empty. Now let's implement the Apollo Rick and Morty client. In the constructor we will have the Apollo client, client, and now we can use it to perform queries, and Apollo client dot query characters query execute data now characters. Now let's say to character list and or empty. Now let's implement the second function. So equals Apollo client query character query execute data character, and now we can say to character and also add the quotation mark here, the question mark here. Now let's set up the dependency injection. So create another package called di, and this will contain the app module, and this is an object, not a class, annotated with module and with install in singleton component and class. Now let's provide the Apollo client and return the Apollo client. So let's say provides and singleton. Now let's add an equal sign and say Apollo client dot builder server URL, paste the link that you can get from the schema SDL, and you have it here. Now let's also call build. Now let's create the second function that will provide the Rick and Morty client. So provide Rick and Morty client and return the Rick and Morty client. Annotate this with provides singleton, and this is equal to Rick and Apollo Rick and Morty client. And let's also add the Apollo client as a parameter to that function, and the Dagger Hilt will inject it for us and pass it here. Now let's right click on the Apollo GraphQL course and create another file, a class called GraphQL application, and inherit from the application and annotate it with Hilt Android app. Now let's go to the main activity and then annotate this with Android entry point, and let's open the manifest, Android manifest, and add in the application block the name of that class, and it's called GraphQL application. Now let's go to the domain package and create another package called use case, and the use case is a single case function, and let's start with the get character list. And in a small app this is overkill because it's a lot of boilerplate code, but let's do it. Let's get the client first. Now let's say fun execute, and this will return a list of simple character, and let's say client dot get character list and return it. And let's also make this suspend. Now let's create the second use case, which is the get character by ID, private val client Rick and Morty client, fun execute, pass the ID, and let's say equals, and also make this suspend client dot get character by ID and pass the ID here. Now let's create another file here, and this will contain the use cases because we want to inject them a single time, not multiple times. because we have to create multiple functions for that, and it's more practical to have one injected class and have them inside of it. And let's call this character use cases, and this is a data class, and we have the get character by ID and get character list. Now let's go back to the data package in the app module and create another provides function, provides singleton fun provide character use cases, and get the Rick and Morty client, and return the character use cases equals character use cases, and create them here. So get character by ID is get character by ID and pass the client, Rick and Morty client, and get character list use case, get character list, pass the client. Now let's collapse the data package and the domain, and let's create another package in the UI called screen, and let's start by implementing the character list. And let's create the character list state, which is a data class, and this will have is loading, and this is a boolean of false, and the character list, which is a list of simple character, and by default it is an empty list. Now let's create the character lists view model. So character list view model, inherit from the view model class, and annotate this with hilt view model. Now let's inject in the constructor the use cases and import the inject. Now let's create a private val state, which is equal to immutable state flow, and here we will pass the character list state, and this will make us able to edit the state in the view model. Let's say val state and state as state flow, and this will be observed in the UI. Now we can say init and call the use cases, get character list, execute, and let's open the view model scope, and let's get the result. Now let's also update the state and say it.copy is loading is false, and the character list is equal to the result. And I forgot to add at the beginning of the function that his loading is true. Now let's create the character list screen. So character list screen. Oh, oops. Now let's try again. Character list screen, and say character list screen, and create a view model, hilt view model. And now let's observe the state. So state is equal to view model dot state, collect a state with lifecycle, and this will collect the state in lifecycle over menu. And now let's also get the context that we'll use when we display the asynchronous image from the coil library. Let's start by saying lazy column, and open the block and say content padding is equal to padding values. Let's add the scaffold first and get the padding from here. Padding, and let's opt in for it. and let's say top equals padding dot calculate top padding plus 15 dp. Import the dp. Bottom is equal to padding, calculate bottom padding plus 15 dp. Start is equal to 20 dp and the end is equal to 20 dp. Now let's create the items, get the list one, and save state dot, I forgot to add by here, and this will get rid of the state dot value, and we can say directly state character list, open the block and say character, and now we can create a list item. Let's remove this, oops, and the headline text is the name of the character, so text character dot name supporting text is text character dot species, and the leading content is async image. Now let's say image request dot builder. Let's put this on separate lines. The content description is null, and pass the context here. Data, we have the character image here, image dot crossfade, and this will make a crossfade animation, and we set it to true, and dot build. Now we have to create the modifiers, so modifier clickable, and let's go here and add the add parameters on character click and get the ID as a string and return nothing. So on character click and pass the character dot ID. Also we have to add the modifier size and 64 dp, and now let's create another package called character detail, and this will have the character state, which is a data class, is loading, which is a boolean, and default value is false, and the character that can be null. Now let's create the view model. So character view model, and inherit from the view model, here view model. Now we can inject into the constructor the dependency that is the use case, private val use cases, and now we also need to add the save state handle, private val save state handle, and this will help us to get the ID from the navigation route, so we'll use it later in the init block. So let's start with the state. State is mutable state flow of character state. Oops. We also have the state that is used in the UI, state dot as state flow. Now we have to open the init block and say save state handle get string the ID, and open a let block and save your model scope launch and get the ID from the save state handle. And now we can use the get character by ID, execute and pass the ID, and let's say the result is equal to that, and update the state. Character is equal to the result, and is loading is false. And I forgot to say that is loading is true at the beginning. Now let's create the screen. So on your file called character screen, create a composable called character screen and pass the view model and is equal to healed view model, and navigate back function, which will be triggered when we press the back button from the top bar. So let's also get the context, because we'll use the asynchronous image again. So local context.current, and let's create the scaffold and opt in for it and get the padding. Now let's say top bar is equal to center aligned top bar, and the title is empty, and say navigation icon is an icon button, and inside it has the not the painter. We will use the image vector 1 icons dot rounded arrow back. Oops. Let's add the content description, navigate back. Now let's create a column that has an asynchronous image inside. So let's put this on separate lines. The content description is null, and let's say image request dot builder, pass the context, and the data is oh, I forgot to create the states. So let's say state by view models state, collect a state with lifecycle, and import. Okay, now let's say state dot character image and add the question mark, and let's also say or empty. Now we can also add the crossfade animation and call dot build, and put this here and add the modifier with the size of 250 dp and import the dp. To get rid of the padding error, we have to say modifier padding and pass the padding here. And now let's also create another column that has some padding inside. So padding, horizontal padding is 20 dp and the vertical padding is 15 dp. Now we have to create the title, so text, and not the text button, the text composable, and let's say state dot character name and say or empty. Let's style this a little bit by saying font weight is font weight bold, and the style is material theme dot typography title large, and let's also add the gender and the species one by one next to each other, and let's say a row. Let's move this text here and say state dot character and gender, and I forgot to add or empty, and let's put the species, so state character species and say or empty. Now we want to make this fill the max with modifier fill max width and say horizontal arrangement is arrangement dot space around, and before setting up the navigation we have to add the navigate back function on the navigation icons. So navigate back, and now let's collapse these and go to the main activity and create the nav controller. Nav controller is equal to remember nav controller, and now we need to create the nav host. This will link the nav controller to the navigation graph. Oops. Let's also add the start destination and create another package in the UI called util, and this will contain the route object, and let's create the character list, and this is equal to character underscore list, and const file character is equal to character and question mark ID is equal to ID in curly braces. Now let's go back to the main activity and call the route dot character list, put this on separate lines and create the first screen, and the route is character list, and let's say character list screen. Don't click, we'll call the nav controller dot navigate, pass the route dot character list character and say replace, and now we will replace the ID from here that is in curly braces. So let's say ID and pass the ID that we get from the character ID, and now we are done with this screen. We have the route dot character, and this has the character screen. Now let's remove this and add on navigate back and say nav controller pop backstack. Now let's run the app and see how it looks. As you can see, we have the list of the characters, and let's click on this one and center this horizontally. So our horizontal alignment center horizontally, and let's also remove this row because it looks ugly. In my head it looked better. I forgot to add fill max size, and now let's rerun the app. Now let's click again on Jerry and everything is fine. And if you like this video, make sure to follow me for more content like this, and see you in the next video.